It's my great pleasure today to present our work on the gestural elicitation study on how people can opt in and opt out from interaction with large displays. Now, before I get started, I would like to mention that this is work based on Isabel's Benavente's excellent final year project that she worked on when she was a student at UCL. And because she moved on and unfortunately can't be here today to present the work anymore, I'll present our work on her behalf. Now, for the next 15 minutes, I would like to guide you through three essential parts. Well, first, I begin with our motivation, and that motivation is a little bit longer than I usually motivate our work, but it's very important to bring that point across. The second part is that I will go through some of our findings, then the setup of our study and what we did find out. And last, I want to close with some pointers of what we can do next and where to move next. Now, let me start with motivating our work. Now, within our community of ISS, many of us are interested in designing new kinds of engaging experiences for interacting with large displays, whiteboards, and maybe every now and then also still tabletops. To make these novel interactions happening, what we do use is quite often, as you've just seen, using some kind of mechanisms for capturing people moving in space, where they're going, and interpreting those movements to make our systems react appropriately. For example, a system might react to a person moving closer and change the content on the display depending on the person's movement and approach. Now, to get that information, we use a variety of different technologies. You have seen Kinect just now, but many other technologies are available to get a sense of where people move and how we can build these interactive systems. Now, these systems now, or similar cameras to Kinect and many other technologies we can use, provide the information we can use to build engaging experiences, such as what we explored even in our own work in the past, framed around proxemic interactions and building interactive displays that react to the presence of people, to the approach, and their interactions. And many other examples could be listed. You just see here the example from the last talk about real-world deployments mentioned in the related work. And also, of course, just Eva's work that you presented of the Mirror on the Wall project to engage people in those touch interactions with the displays. Now, one very important other use case are installations that are around advertisements in public spaces, such as the example shown over here, where playful interactions and fluid animations are supposed to motivate people to pause, interact, and of course, in some way also engage with a brand. And the variety of installations is remarkable and shows like a very creative spectrum of what we can design in those interactive spaces. Now, one interesting trend for sure is the increasing size of such interactions, just as an example shown over here. This one is in remarkable scale, I think one of the largest scale in a way of interactive floors I've seen, using a combination of some projector and camera-based systems set up in a mall and all around advertisements and engaging them in playful interactions. Now, when considering such interactive systems, I would argue that we need to consider the question, should we give people the choice if they want to interact or not? And then also the question, of course, how can we do that? Now, one last part of my motivation, I want to pitch actually another paper. This one is from 2014. It's from the DIS conference. And I just want to quickly talk about it because they bring one very important point across, which is very important for my work. So it's the Dark Patterns paper in Proxemic Interactions from DIS. And in it, the authors bring across the main message that we as designers must consider the negative effects of our technology, and that this is especially critical for any system that senses and exploits human activity, anything that reacts to those parts of information. Now, in the paper, then, they illustrate the different ways the devices can exploit the fact that we don't know that the devices are there, what they track, and our movements and interactions in that space. And they identified an interesting set of several dark design patterns, such as some listed over here, the attention grabber, captive audience, making personal information public, and so on. And I really encourage you, it's quite an interesting read to have a look at. But more importantly, what they also explain in the paper are some of the very fundamental problems behind it. And that is, in some of those systems, we do interpret the proximity to an installation as an implicit opt-in. And second, that physical space is imbued with dual meaning. A person may approach a location for one reason, but as a consequence, they're exposed to the system exploiting their research for their approach for another reason. Now, the critical discussion of this paper and the trends of interactive technologies explained earlier lead me to the recommendation that we should try and give people the choice if they want to interact or not. And fundamentally, I believe there are two key choices we can make to make that happening. First, we could allow opting in. This way it means the person has a choice and explicitly performs an interaction to engage with the system. But second, the alternative is we could allow an easy opt-out. In this case, the person is able to make an explicit choice to stop the interaction with that system and move on. Now, when we look at large interactive screens, touch input, of course, can be used as an implicit opt-in. Touching the display can be interpreted as that moment that you're interacting with it. So in a way, opting in this case is much easier. But on the other hand, when we look at 3D gesture recognition systems, just like the examples I mentioned earlier, that problem becomes a little bit more difficult. How can we allow a person to opt in or opt out? Now, a question you could ask, could we just walk around an installation or setup to avoid interaction? And while this is definitely the case, let's just quickly go back to the example I mentioned earlier. And let's just say that Joe over here on the left side would like to move to the other side. Now, if he would prefer, for whatever reason, not being embarrassed or he just doesn't want to interact with the installation, avoiding the installation would in this case mean walking around that projected floor like this. Now, while in this case, this might be just a minor inconvenience, of course, there might be other cases and other interactive systems all around it. So the question is, when can we actually make that decision now of how to allow people to explicitly make that choice of either interacting or not? So let's try and have a look at how to solve some part of it and how to find some techniques about how we can give people a choice to opt in or out. To find more about the spectrum of gestures for opting in and opting out, we decided to run a gesture elicitation study. Now, in this kind of study, end users are shown the desired effect of an action, called a referent, and asked to propose a gesture, called a symbol, that would bring that effect about. Now, all the resulting gestures of all the participants are then combined in a gesture set catalog and then analyzed further. And that's what we did, and I'll show you that in a few minutes. Now, I would like to better explain the concept of what a gesture elicitation study does. And I would like to involve all of you in a very little experiment. It just takes a few seconds, and I hope you all join in. So I would like to ask all of you to please stand up just for a few seconds, just for me. It's good to perform a little activity. Now, again, this just takes a few seconds. Now, imagine you're in the following situation. You walk by a large advertisement board as a display that you can see over here that mimics your movements and displays various advertisement slogans following your path. Now, here comes the important part. On the count of 3, could you please perform a gesture with your arms, one arm or both arms, to indicate that you don't want to interact? So I'm counting down, and please all start at the same time. There's no right or wrong. All right, ready? 1, 2, and 3. Oh my God, that was amazing, amazing. Thank you very much, thank you very much. So what we just did was one example of a very short snippet. The introduction I gave you was much shorter than what we do in our experiments, but fundamentally they are the same. Now let's have a look at the results. Of what I've just seen here mirrors our experience with the gesture elicitation study we did with our users. It was a remarkable diversity of gestures that you used. Also raising arms, waving. There was a crossing that was performed over here with their arms. I've seen that, and also some turning at the back, actually turning around and raising arms. Now, there are, and you might ask that now, there are a number of benefits of when we use gesture elicitation study in our experiments. And Mary Morris and colleagues actually very well described those. And just quickly 3 of those, of what are the benefits of asking users actually to perform those and learning from the gestures they perform. Since the research involves users, there might result in less complex gesture sets, and the end-user involvement can result in gesture sets that are also more likely to be discoverable and memorable by a larger user base. Now, at the same time, there is one potential problem, and that is legacy bias. The proposing of gestures users are familiar with from other kinds of interactions, and that is happening not only in gesture elicitation studies, of course. Now, we did perform this study in our lab. We had 16 participants, 8 male, 8 female. We had pairs of 2. We showed them 2 videos and 20 references in total. So let me just go through those three parts in a bit more detail. First, following advice from Morris and colleagues, we did try to minimize the legacy bias by running studies in pairs of 2. Now, in this article it was mentioned that inviting users to participate in elicitation studies in groups rather than individually can be another approach to overcome legacy bias, and then in the paper they continue and explain more of how that works. Second, our participants watched short video clips illustrating the interactive display. Now, we had 2 key scenarios, one commercial with a Connect-based retail clothing mirror, and another one with an entertainment scenario, the interactive cube that you see here. Now, important was that for both videos, we made sure that we don't show the moment people started the interaction, because that's something we want to find out. So it was a snapshot from the middle, the people seeing, interacting with that display. Now, overall, we had 20 references. We had 2 because we had the opting in and opting out scenario. We had our commercial entertainment setting, and we have 5 different body parts that we gave people as an input to use for the gesture they perform. In particular, using their head, using their hands only, using their arms, their body, and their voice. Now, this sums up our setup of the study. So let's have a closer look at what we did find out when our participants ran through the study. Now, first of all, they proposed an overall set of 430 gestures that we structured and classified over here. Now, this table shows you a lot of detail. It's in the paper, and I'll come back to it quickly, but I first want to look at one very important part of every gesture elicitation study, and that is agreement scores. Now, there are different measures to do, and this is one of the most recent ones by Batavu and Warburg that actually shows you how to calculate an agreement scores that shows essentially and fundamentally of how many people agree on the same kind of gesture. Now, if the agreement score is close to 0, each participant proposes a unique different gesture for that action, for that referent, and if it reaches 1, all participants propose the same gesture given. Just as a side note, if you ever do run those calculations, Jake Warburg on his website publishes a tool that makes calculations easier, and I just want to pitch it because it's a real time saver to do some calculations automated with that tool. So have a look if you ever consider running gesture elicitation studies. Now, our agreement scores vary across the different reference we do have, but you can see that from 22.5%, they go all the way down to 5.3. So overall, we have those agreement scores that show a relatively low level of convergence. So that means there are some similarities in the gestures that people did propose, but they're not all the same. And there's nothing we could find in a set of universal gestures that you could use, which in a way is almost the dream, maybe the starting dream at least, for everyone running a gesture elicitation study, because it would be great to say this is close to your universal gesture that you could use. But overall, we are in good company. I'm not sure who else in the audience did perform gesture elicitation studies, but agreement scores tend to remain in this range over here. And again, Jake Warburg and his team, they just summarized some of the recent studies and the low agreement scores. So maybe that just shows these are interactions that are not that common, and there is just no standard yet. But still, it's worth it to have a closer look at the gestures that were performed. So let me just quickly come back to that table that I showed you earlier already. So let's have a look at the little quadrant over here in the corner. Here are some examples that people did propose to opt in that scenario. It includes nodding, smiling, and long blinking with their eyes, waving with their hand, thumbs up gesture, and swiping with their arms or bigger greeting wave. Similarly, for opting out, we have a large variety of different gestures that were proposed, pulling the lifted arms down, making a cross with their arms, which I've also seen over here, turning away, showing their back for a few seconds, and so on. So this is an interesting set. By the way, the green numbered ones are the ones that were proposed at least 5 times, and the ones in bold were proposed at least 3 times. So these are the key ones. All of the other ones are either 2 or 3 people that proposed them. Now, these detailed gestures show us an interesting spectrum of possible gestures to consider. But let's have a closer look at some patterns we find. Furthermore, we did notice that the semantic mappings of agreement and disagreement in order to opt in or opt out between the yes and the no, good and bad, beginning and stopping, as a pattern generally for both the opting in and opting out. Now, furthermore, often gestures related to activities of physically opening or closing a session, as participants even mentioned in there as well. This is something like open. It's an open kind of thing, like closing the shades and so on. So many of those examples were given as well. And overall, this then again is more details you can find in the paper about those mappings that we can leverage and consider in our own designs about closing gestures that follow a similar pattern or opening and initiating a session. Now, what we did also do is we asked participants at the end in a 5-point Likert scale about how comfortable they would be interacting through those gestures in public. Now, there's something interesting to find over here, and that is that overall the performing gestures with fingers and hands and their arms was perceived the most comfortable. And again, remember, this is a lab setting, so we asked people of how comfortable they would feel. It was not an in-the-wild study. But we can see some trends over here and also notice that torso and posture of their body or even voice were considered much less comfortable to perform in public. Last, we asked, again on a 5-point Likert scale, of how comfortable they were about being captured by the cameras in different settings. Now, this is maybe not that surprising if you ask about it. There's kind of a mixed response about being captured for art and fun installation, and a much more negative response about being captured in a shop or for advertisements. And that, again, is maybe not too surprising, but something interesting for us to consider in our future studies. Also, as one last example of the results we did find is that the different physical environments of where the interaction might take place, the most preferred ones were the ones in the park or the street, and the least preferred ones in store environments. Now, I would like to close just for a minute or two with some pointers of what we can do next. First, the question, should we always have opting in as a default? It's a valid question to ask, right? Meaning that the system should always wait for an explicit action to actually start the interaction with their display. Now, this is obviously difficult to answer as it depends heavily on the context of use, and it might even conflict the interest. Again, remember the interest of advertisements and other playful interactions, and at the same time, it might also conflict with a walk-up and use scenario when you require an additional step to begin. However, I would argue that with our rapidly increasing number of interactive installations and advertisements, we do need to be careful to find the right balance between allowing people the choice of whether they want to interact or not. Now, second, I would argue that in general, every interactive system that tracks people while moving in everyday environments will benefit from integrating methods for people to make the choice if they want to interact or not. And if the decision is made that the movement in a particular area is interpreted as an implicit opt-in, there should be ways we give people to have a very easy way to opting out besides moving out of an area, which is kind of the default fallback, I would argue, as an absolute minimum. And third, as mentioned earlier, we did not find a universal gesture for opting in or opting out. And in a way, we didn't even expect that. But we can use the gestures we did find, and I invite you to maybe have a closer look at them, as a starting point, and also some of the patterns we find. Because last, what we can also consider is, because we have a low convergence, we can build systems that have multiple redundant ways to either opt in or opt out. Now, what should we study next? Just a few pointers. As an obvious next step, it will be interesting to have a closer look at installations in the wild. Of course, the move from a lab study to in the wild will reveal possibly other patterns and other problems we can address. Second, we should have a look at visual indicators, and you saw that in the previous project and many other projects about how can we actually communicate, because in the end, we're adding another gesture to perform, in this case, opting in and out, so we're not solving that problem. And third, there's a question about acceptability in the wild. And again, it's future studies that hopefully will tell us much more about this. Now, in the future, I look forward to finding many new forms of choice we can give users about whether they want to interact with the system or not, and how we can actually strike that balance between ease and use, walk-up and use, and the control that we actually give people whether they want to interact or not. Now, with this, I look forward to your questions. Thank you very much.
Okay, I think we have, well, let's take the time for some questions. Okay, maybe Raimund, can we have a mic here?
Hi, Nick. Sorry, yeah. Raimund Sachset, Interactive Media Adaptation. Thanks a lot for your excellent talk and excellent work. Just to mention, again, I assume this was a little bit work coming from our Dachstuhl seminar on proxemic interaction, just to make this acknowledgement as well, because we had a nice Dachstuhl seminar about this topic. My question is a little bit of a philosophical nature. So imagine in the future we have a lot of sensors around us, not just the one installation or the one advertisement, but lots of them. So how do you imagine if you go through this world increasingly doing gestures of the different kinds and not knowing whether this system is recognizing this or another system is maybe requiring a different set of gestures or so. So what do you think about in a world of many sensors and many automated applications, how can we cope with that as human beings? Philosophical question.
This is a really good question, and the short answer is I really don't know yet. But let me address this a little bit. In a way, we have an increasing number of interactive systems, and you're right that if we are introducing gestures to opting in and opting out, we could actually open Pandora's box, right? And have the same problem than before of making it then complex for a person to consider, how can I now opt in or out, or what other choices do I have to actually begin the interaction or end the interaction, in particular if it's very diverse. And that's in a way where I possibly argue for some redundancy in the gestures we use, and maybe also trying out some of the starting points we have in here. Short answer, though, again, is that I really don't know how to address it. What I do believe, though, is we can increasingly add, and maybe then over time, we also find some convergence of the kind of gestures that we can use for allowing an easier opting in and out. And the first part you mentioned, the Duckshul seminar, the other paper I really pitched, the Dark Patterns paper, also comes out of work that started at the Duckshul seminar. And again, I'm pitching mostly other people's work here, but it's an interesting paper to read, so look it up if you're interested.
Okay.
Thank you.
So we have two more questions.
Sheila, yeah.
Hi, Nick. It's a beautiful study, but I have a kind of philosophical question. So when you're doing this and you're asking people what it is they would like to have, how do you think about those kinds of studies in context with Henry Ford's famous quote that if I asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses?
That's a very good point. It also related to that one is the question of what is the role of an interaction designer, right? Because there's, of course, an important argument that could be made that the role of interaction designers is still to find the most appropriate gestures and interactions and design them with all the knowledge they have. So let me answer your question with the possible result of a gesture elicitation study that shows a clear favorite, like a clear outcome of a gesture that everyone performs. Does that automatically make it the gesture we should move forward? No, because there are many other reasons we need to take into account. Just one quick example is you maybe have an opting in or opting out gesture which is very close to a gesture that has another function in your system. So pointing maybe might be an example, because if the fist actually is the opting in and opting out, then pointing might be very close in the feature space to that gesture, which might rule it out or could not be used. And I think actually in my talk, I kind of feel it's one of those papers that really opens many more questions, even for myself, and tons of follow-up work, because I really don't know yet how to address this point. I believe that some of the pieces we found were, of course, also in a way already expected from us, because every time you do run a gesture elicitation study, you already have a feeling of where this could go, or what kind of gestures could be proposed. The most interesting ones are the ones that really surprise you, or the ones that are contradicting. And those are the highlights, I guess, to find out of gesture elicitation study, besides other things like patterns or some similarities and so on. But it's a very good question. I don't think I did it justice to really answer your question, but this is brilliant, and I hope we continue that after the session in the break. Yeah.